Life crises. We were talking about age a second ago, and I've got two friends. I've got one friend that's 29 and another friend that's 39, and they're going through what appears to be, on the surface, a crisis.
Yeah.
And when I read your book about how you call it the 9-ending crisis,
Yeah.
it all made sense. What is that?
Yeah. So this is some research with a colleague of mine, Hal Hirschfield, who's also a very good friend at UCLA. And when he was at NYU at the time, we were sitting in his office, and I said to him, I ran a marathon when I was 29. I've never run another one, but I ran one at 29. And I remember thinking, I have to show myself as I approach 30 that there's meaning to my life and purpose. I need a big goal. I need to train for something. And I thought that was a really interesting human instinct. Like, it was a very productive one. I ran a marathon, which was not a bad thing. But we were talking about it, and he said to me, it seems like maybe at these ages where there's a 9 at the end of your age and you're looking down the specter of a new decade, that it pushes you to kind of audit your life. You ask yourself, is my life meaningful? Is it what I want it to be? Are there gaps that I need to fill? Is there something I need to do? And so we started to find these big data sets that had some evidence where we could see what ages people were at and looking at their decisions. And we found all sorts of really interesting behaviors when people were 29, 39, 49, 59. You get this big rise in marathon running. So I wasn't the only one. There's an overrepresentation of marathon runners, especially first-time marathon runners who have a 9 at the end of their age. If you were already a marathon runner, you run your fastest marathons in general when you have a 9 at the end of your age. There's also some stuff that's not so good. So you see a massive rise in infidelity. So we found evidence that there's an overrepresentation of people at those ages who are seeking out extramarital affairs. You even see a rise in suicide. So that doesn't mean everyone who's got a 9 end at their ending age is at risk of that, but it shows in general that we sort of hunt for meaning. And so the midlife crisis idea that maybe when you approach 40, there's going to be a big crisis there, that may be true, but we also found this kind of cyclical decade. Every decade you get this sort of miniature 9-ending crisis.
I was in the best shape I've ever been in my life when I was 29. That was the year. That was the year I got closest to having all 8 abs. 30, has it been great? Not as great. So I was wondering, as you said that, if what happens when the year after, if 29 is often some of our most productive achievements or affairs, does that mean 30, 40, 50 is when we chill a little bit?
It varies a little. It's funny. So what you see is it's sort of like a wave, and the peak of the wave is at 9, but there are some people who it only dawns on them when they actually hit the 0 ending age. Some people it starts at the 8 ending age. It's really when you get to like 34, 35, 36, 44, 45, 46, right in the middle of the decade, when you see the trough for all of these kinds of behaviors. We're sort of most in our lives and doing our thing and not really questioning as much, which, I mean, we found that fascinating, that just the accident that we happen to count using a base 10 system means that every 10 years we zoom back and audit our lives in this way.
It's such an because the number is such an irrelevant thing in the context of your physiological health, your metabolic health, but symbols matter. And you talk about symbols in your first book as well.
Yeah.
And we don't appreciate how much symbols sway our life in fundamental ways, do we?
Yeah. No, that's right. That's true. And I think, even these numbers are symbolic. They have symbolic meaning for us. It's something, when you say I'm in my 30s, it's different from saying I'm 28 or 29, even if it's just a year apart or even a few days apart. And it's the same with what it means to be in your 40s. It's symbolic for a time of life and certain expectations about what that time of your life is supposed to be. And so I think that's what happens. We talked about expectations, that you're suddenly in your 40s or your 50s or your 60s, and then you say, what does that mean? And here is where my expectations are. I should have the following things, maybe a certain amount of money, a certain career status, maybe a partner, maybe kids. And then do you have those things? And if you don't, then you get this kind of acting out behavior, some of it productive that tries to remedy the problem. Perhaps you try to get fit and run a marathon, but sometimes for some people it's not very productive behavior.
I know this more than most because I started in business at 18, and you can imagine when I was on BBC Newsnight, and they introduce you, and he's only 18 years old. My business is making zero money.
Yeah.
But they were just blown away because of expectation of what an 18-year-old should be doing. And then I had that throughout my career. And he's only 25 and he's got 1,000, and he's only 20, and then he's only 29. And then
it stops.
Stephen Bartlett is an entrepreneur. And I'm like, listen, one day has changed and suddenly no one's introducing me by my age, because 29 and 30, the expectations of a 29-year-old running a business and how big that business might be and how many team members and revenue versus a 30-year-old, you go, he better be a billionaire or else we're not going to mention his age.
I'm in my early 40s and it's the same thing. As an academic, you know, if you're a professor in your 30s, you're young. And then you hit, suddenly one day you're 40 and they're like, yeah, you're a professor, whatever.
One of the things that stands in the way of acceptance is this question, which a lot of people ask when they get stuck, which is, or when they have a life quake, which is, why me?
Yeah.
Why did this happen to me?
Yeah.
And that relinquishes our sense of personal responsibility. It makes us a victim to the situation, which we might objectively be a victim, however you want to define it, to a situation. But it doesn't seem to be conducive with getting out of it.
No, it doesn't. And, you know, the interesting thing is if you go to people who are at the end of their lives, they're on their deathbeds, and they know that the end is near, and you say to them, did you ever have a why me situation? Did something happen in your life at any point where you had cause, whether you did or not, you had cause to say, why me? You know, this felt unfair. 100% of them will say yes. That's another case where we feel isolated in those moments. We're like, why me? The implication of that is it's me, but not someone else. Their turn will come. We will all have these moments that are really hard to deal with. Some of us have had them already. Some of us will have more of them in the future, but they are universal. And so the best thing you can do, I think, in those moments is to just kind of recognize that it's okay to be sad and pissed off and to struggle with them. But also there's some comfort in knowing that actually this is just what it is to be human. Everyone has these moments. You're not unique in responding that way, and you're not unique in experiencing that situation in the first place.
It's privileged as well, as you write about in your book. It's a privileged response to have that you don't see across other cultures as readily.
Yeah, it's privileged. And it also, I think, reflects the sense of agency we've got from becoming essentially masters of our worlds in ways that were not true for most of human history. You know, as science and medicine goes, we're living longer, we are generally a stronger species, we can do a lot of incredible things, we can move spacecraft to other planets. You know, it's ridiculous the number of things we can do. And so as a result of that, we kind of assume that that's the kind of control we should have over every aspect of our lives. If we can do big things that are amazing, why can't we do small things that are amazing? And that's not the way the world works. And we mistake that general sense of human control over the world, especially as we move away from religion and become more secular. We develop that sense of privilege. And I think cultures that don't have that to the same extent, or that still hew to religion more strongly, you have much more of a recognition that, hey, to some extent, I'm kind of at the mercy of whether it's the gods or however you want to describe it. And that makes you more open to the idea that you don't have control.
Is that less westernized cultures, so cultures with less money?
Yes. That's why the privilege aspect comes into it, because I think the West, where we are more...
It's expectations again, isn't it?
It comes back to almost everything. Yeah, it's a huge, huge part of the human experience.
We all need to lower our expectations.
Or have realistic ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's going to be so many people that are listening that realize that, you know, they objectively realize that life comes in seasons. But the difficulty comes is when one of those seasons ends, and we kind of resist it ending. And a lot of people, I think, will feel stuck when a season or a chapter of life, one of those life quakes, you know, I guess the start of a life quake, I guess, is when one of those seasons ends. Knowing from a intellectual, from a strategy standpoint, how to deal with it in that moment, because when a season of life ends, there's so much uncertainty and fear, and you can't always see the season to come. And that's where a lot of those feelings come from. You talked about acceptance being a key path forward, but is there anything else? I really want to make sure we've completed that. Is there anything else that we can do to be better at transitioning from one season of life to the other?
Yeah, so I love this philosophy from the rock musician Jeff Tweedy, the frontman of the band Wilco, who's also a writer. He writes, he does music, he's a Renaissance man. he talks about that feeling of being stuck, and sometimes it's in transitions, but also it's when you're chronically being forced to come up with new ideas if you're a creative. And I think this applies to transitions to new periods as well. He talks about this idea that, you know, for decades he has had to wake up and his bread and butter is to come up with creative songs and to write good passages that will then become part of a book. That is asking a lot of people. But what he does is he recognizes that above all else, action is going to move him forward. When you feel stuck, action, even if it's slightly sideways, it may not be exactly where you want to go, but the mere fact that you're acting gives you feedback that you're not stuck, that you're moving in the right direction. And so he talks about, at least temporarily, lowering your expectations to the ground. And so he talks about pouring out the bad ideas. If he's writing a song, he'll say, what's the worst musical phrase I could write right now? Or what's the worst line for this book? Let me come up with 3 of the worst lines ever. And that's easy to do because you have no expectations. It's not maximizing or satisfying. It's just like the bare minimum. And when you do that, you get the ball rolling, you show yourself that you're not stuck. And so then what follows that, as he describes it, is the good stuff. That's when you get your good ideas because the wheels are being greased and you're moving forward. And I think that's true in transition periods, that we spend a lot of time agonizing. There's a lot of dealing with the emotions, which is fair. There's a lot of time strategizing. But just acting is tremendously liberating, even if the action itself doesn't bring measurable rewards in the short term.
I was thinking as you were saying that, within the context of dating. So you've just come out of a horrific divorce, you're sat at home on your own, you can't even remember how to date.
Yeah.
And you're going to try and find someone that is as appealing as the person that's just dumped you or divorced you. And they're hard to find. So you just procrastinate, you kind of sit in the misery, and that's where you feel stuck.
Yeah.
If I apply the philosophy you've just said to bad ideas first, what I'd actually do is I'd just go on a date.
Yeah.
And I'd say, listen, this is not going to be the husband, but we're going to start getting some practice and we're going to start getting out there and putting my makeup back on and whatever and getting out there into the market. And you'd take a bad date just to get the ball rolling. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of people do that. That's the philosophy of the rebound, right? That,
oh, yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's right. I mean, I think from the perspective of the person who's been dumped, we always think about the rebound from the perspective of the person who suddenly discovers they're the next option.
Yeah, yeah.
You know that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
But if you are the person who's trying to get back out there, I think that's a really great thing to do. And it doesn't have to be a romantic date. It's just like, go do something. You know, you'll wallow for a little bit, which is fine. But the best thing you can do is to, as I said, move sideways. Moving forwards might be going on more dates to try and find the next person. It's not time for that yet. It's time to just go to a movie, go and see a rock band, like do whatever it is you like doing, just so you're not doing nothing. Just act. And action, one of the great things it does, especially when you're ruminating and you're thinking about how bad and tough things are, is action is a phenomenal distraction. Like when you're acting, you're not thinking as much. And so it's worth doing just to be doing something.
That's why people rebound, isn't it? But it also gives us a sense of meaning and purpose, which is often the thing that the rejection has robbed us of. So me going out and having a one-night stand, I don't advise it. I'm not against it, but I don't advise it. I have no opinion on one-night stands. Right. Going out and having a one-night stand, maybe the reason I feel rejection is because I'm telling myself a story that I'm unlovable or unwanted, and going out and getting evidence that someone is interested in me can help with the pain of the rejection. And it's the same within work. If you've been fired from a job, maybe you're telling yourself a story about your self-worth, and just going out there and doing some work, even if it's volunteering somewhere, could help ease the rejection. Because the rejection often is just a story, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. I also think the human experience is essentially bouncing like a ping pong ball from one thing to the next, where the next thing you do is trying to capture whatever feels like it's missing from the last thing. And actually a lot of relationships, when people jump from relationship to relationship, are about exactly that. It's like when a relationship ends, you think about what was the thing that was missing in that one? Like, why didn't it work? And you fixate on that with the next person. Now, there may have been some great things about the last person. You forget to focus on retaining those in the next person. And so then you're missing something different in the next person that you go to after that. And so this is what we do in jobs. This is what we do in how we spend our time, in pursuits, in dating. We're constantly trying to create the thing that feels like it's missing, because humans by nature just focus on deficits, on losses, on the negatives. And so that sort of propels us forward.
What's a better approach?
I mean, you know, the explicit one is the sort of gratitude approach in saying what's working. Like that's the flip side of this, is to say, whether it's about a relationship or a job, what were the best 5 things about that relationship that I would want to retain in future? If you don't ask yourself that question, it biases the decisions you make thereafter. And I think it biases them in a way that's really unproductive. It's going to be true if you jump to a new job, move to a new country or city or town, any change. It's worth asking, not only what didn't work and do I want to fix, but also what did work and do I want to retain?
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.